Greetings to everyone at this year's Digital Inclusion Summit. And thank you to all the members of HTTP for your leadership in ensuring that diverse voices and perspectives are not only participating in, but are at the center of the public debate over the future of privacy and technology. Technology, as we all know, continues to develop and evolve every single day faster than any of us can truly keep up with. And many of these advancements have an incredible ability to transform and improve our lives. Just think of how many of us have used Zoom or virtual learning or teleworking or online deliveries to get ourselves through the last 6 months of the COVID-19 pandemic. These kinds of advancements were unthinkable just a decade or so ago. They were the stuff of Hollywood movies, and now they're at our fingertips. But there are still many Americans who lack access to these incredible tools, with a disproportionate impact on Black, Hispanic, low-income Americans, and rural communities. That's why one of my top priorities in the Senate has been expanding access to high-speed broadband, especially at this moment of national crisis. Last month, I called on internet service providers to suspend limits and fees that come with increased broadband use, to expand coverage areas, to help close the digital divide, and give as many Americans as possible the digital tools they need to thrive in these trying times. But along with their many benefits, we must also be aware that these emerging technologies come hand in hand with some profound problems. Just consider how easily and how often technology like facial recognition can be abused to violate our right to privacy. We've already seen it used by the Chinese government in a manner right out of Orwell's novel, 1984, to surveil and detain individuals involved in protests and demonstrations, and to enslave 1 million members of the Chinese Uyghur community. And here in the United States, even as agencies like the FBI use the technology to search through databases of driver's licenses, studies have shown that Asian and Black individuals are up to 100 times more likely to be misidentified by facial recognition technology. That's severely troubling when you see the growing adoption of this technology by law enforcement entities and recognize the extent to which minorities are already over-surveilled and over-policed in this country as it is. That's why earlier this year, I joined with several of my colleagues to introduce the Facial Recognition and Biometric Technology Moratorium Act. If it becomes law, this bill would end the use of biometric technology, like facial recognition technology, by the United States government. And it would boldly reaffirm the civil liberties of every person in this country by protecting their right to live free of unjust and discriminatory surveillance by government and law enforcement. The threat posed by this technology, which is rife with systemic inaccuracy and biases, is far too great for us to stand by and do nothing. We are living through a historic moment right now in which our nation is grappling and coming to terms with systemic racism and inequality that have plagued and shaped our nation since before we were even a nation. Men and women of all ages and races have taken to the streets of city after city across America demanding change. We cannot adopt emerging methods or technologies that exacerbate these systems of inequality and discrimination or lead us down the path to being a surveillance state. And I know that all of you at the Hispanic Technology and Telecommunications Partnership understand this fact. That's why you're working hard to bring equality to this sector of our economy, because how easily it is used to deny our civil liberties. And you recognize that if we had more diversity and more inclusion in this sector, more folks from more minority backgrounds were the ones developing and writing the code for these emerging technologies, then maybe people of color wouldn't be so easily misidentified. So thank you for your work to ensure diversity and equity in the tech sector. And thank you for hosting this event as you continue to stand at the forefront of the debate about the future of technology, privacy, and our civil liberties.
Hello again, this is Brent Wilkes, and I'm not sure if you're aware, but my other hat is that I'm the Senior Vice President for Institutional Development for Hispanic Federation, which is one of the premier Latino membership organizations working with local Latino community-based organizations across the country. We have well over 200 members, and we work with a larger network of over 500 Latino nonprofits around the United States. And our goal is really to help them to accomplish their mission and do the work that they're already doing, but to do it more effectively. We do that by making grants to those organizations, as well as providing technical assistance, model programs, and support to them in whatever capacity that we can. And very excited that we've been able to have a huge impact when it comes to disaster relief. For example, we provided over $40 million in relief work to Puerto Rico in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria, additional support in excess of $10 million in the aftermath of the earthquakes there. And now that COVID-19 has really hit communities across the country, especially hard, we've provided over $14 million in funding to support Latino organizations getting through the COVID-19 emergency relief services. And so the organization is very invested in helping Latino community-based organizations accomplish their mission and to do it even under trying circumstances like we currently are in. In addition to that work, we also are very invested in digital skilling work, and we have launched a new digital skilling initiative with over 25 Latino organizations across the United States. We're providing them with equipment, with curriculum, and with, again, technical support to help them provide digital skilling services to the Latino community at a time when we know that many Latinos are unemployed across the country or are looking for new opportunities beyond the work that they're currently doing. And to do that effectively in this new economy, we would have to make sure that they have the digital skilling skill set that really helps them have a leg up and to be able to find workplace opportunities with great companies where they're located. And so we work closely with these institutions to make sure that they've got the right skill set training that fits what the employers are looking for in their areas, and we help them execute that. And we expect to be able to place close to 15,000 Latinos this year through that initiative. So without further ado, though, I want to introduce our next panel. We've got some great presenters here, again, with Alejandro Roark and Nicole Turner Lee, who are some great leaders to talk to us about this important issue of digital face recognition technology and how that's impacting Latino communities, especially when we look at the issue of government surveillance of our community and how even without necessarily intending to, they've created new avenues to track Latinos and to impact our ability to help our communities. For example, in some of the racial justice protests, digital face recognition technology has aided the government to negatively impact the protesters there and allowed them to, visit them with unfair judicial processes. And so we know that this technology is not intended to necessarily be harmful to Latino communities, but has had unintended consequences for Latino, African American, and many other diverse communities across the country. So without further ado, I want to introduce Alejandro Roark and Nicole Turner Lee to talk to us about this very important issue.
Thank you, Brent. So as we know, facial recognition technology is on the rise, and not just in law enforcement, but in schools across the country. But a new report from the National Institute of Science and Technology, which tested 200 systems and photos of more than 8 million people, suggests that its accuracy can vary widely depending on race and gender. African Americans and Asian Americans and communities of color can be between 10 to 100 times more likely to be misidentified by the technology than white people, and women specifically are more likely to be falsely identified than men. At this point, what is clear is that not all facial recognition systems are created equal. Different algorithms perform differently, but what we currently have is minimal oversight, regulations, or safeguards to ensure that facial recognition tools are achieving a tangible public good. To learn more about what's at stake for communities of color and what we should all know about these powerful tools and their potential harms, as well as their societal benefits, I invited Dr. Nicole Turner Lee, Director for the Center of Technology and Innovation at the Brookings Institution, to our kitchen table conversations on race, technology, and the future of everything. Here are a few highlights from that conversation.
As it was mentioned, I'm Nicole Turner Lee. I'm Senior Fellow in Governance Studies and the Director of the Center for Technology Innovation at the Brookings Institution. And in that portfolio, I work on a variety of issues from digital inclusion. I have a book coming out next year on the U.S. digital divide that includes a focus on some Latina communities, as well as artificial intelligence. And my particular focus there is how do we create technologies that do not necessarily amplify or exacerbate the existing discriminations that we have? And it's important that we as communities of color really pay attention to this because technology is pretty much transforming how we live, learn, and earn. I want to say one more thing about this great organization that I have watched evolve and under this great leader is doing absolutely fantastic things. We need Latina communities to be represented in these conversations. It's really easy for people to think that communities of color have a variety of other issues they're dealing with. And they're right. Voting is one of them as we lead up to a national election. But one thing this pandemic has actually really exerted is that we have a lot at stake if we're not connected. The first line of my book is being connected matters in 2020. And I can tell you something else. It mattered before the pandemic and it's going to matter right after. So I want to make sure that people understand the context for why it's so important to have these conversations that HTTP is having because of who is going to have it if it's not us. So Alejandro, thank you for inviting me and thank you for putting up with me as I actually have been exhausted these last 7 months dealing with the digital divide. I mean, when we look at issues of facial recognition technology, I think it's really important, and we at Brookings are doing a project around this, particularly trying to lay out principles for law enforcement use of facial rec tools. I mean, we want technology to be a problem solver, right? We want technology to be used in ways that actually garner the types of efficiencies that we've not been able to achieve through human cognition. Facial recognition came out of that. I mean, what best to sort of detect and determine the identity of people but through their face? But there are challenges with that technology. I mean, on the one side, facial recognition is absolutely fantastic when we're looking for older Americans who are missing, children who are estranged or exploited. You know, the face detection allows us to age them using computer models to, in some cases, find them, you know, because they're actually used by public safety officials in ways that are for the public good. But, you know, and one other thing I want to mention, when the Boston Marathon bomber, for example, we used facial recognition technology to identify him in a crowd where we were able to identify the type of espionage that he placed upon that activity. But where facial recognition actually has some challenges is its technical accuracy. So if you know me really well and you follow me, you would know one thing about Nicole Turner Lee is that I like to change my hair. So, you know, sometimes it's braided, sometimes it's straight like today, sometimes it's curly and natural. I don't wear many wigs, but you might on occasion find that I might be wearing one. The bottom line is we know that facial recognition does not do a good job with identifying Black women who change their hair. And the fundamental cause of that is that facial recognition does a poor job in identifying people of different skin tones. So the darker you are in complexion, the less likely the facial recognition will be accurate in really determining who you are. And there are implications of that. You know, the implication is not that someone will mistake me for Janet Jackson or beloved Selena. The implication is that someone may actually misidentify me as a criminal. The Congressional Black Caucus just a couple of years ago had facial recognition technologies applied to their entire populace. And out of that, a good portion of them came back as potential criminal defendants, meaning that their faces were sort of equated as mugshots to other similar faces in their system. So on the technical accuracy side, we really have a long way to go to get it right. And part of the reason we've not been able to get Black and Latina faces right on facial recognition is not because we're just so darn beautiful. It is actually related to the fact that we don't have enough people working in those fields that can contribute input towards these diverse and inclusive models. In addition to that, we don't have enough people like myself, who's a sociologist doing technology, that can talk about the sociological implications of finding out that someone that you've actually detained is really innocent. If you think about the disproportionate representation of Blacks and Latinas in the criminal justice system, and you think about the use by law enforcement of this new and shiny object to identify us for criminal cases, the likelihood is that the data that will actually pull upon will be people who are previously incarcerated, which will most likely be us, and it will overlay the technical inaccuracy, which will most likely make it wrong. And so I think, Alejandro, we have to pay attention to these things, particularly if it gets into the hands of the wrong actors. Technology in and of itself is flawed. It's flawed because the very design of it takes into account the external world in which it's deployed. And right now, as you've mentioned, we're dealing with a host of racial inequality challenges, a host of challenges that have been brought on by this administration. And all of that feeds into technologies that by themselves do not discriminate, but rather the people who design it may have unconscious bias that feeds into it, as well as the context in which it's deployed. So facial recognition for criminal justice use may also be inherently flawed just because structurally it's never favored Black and brown people.
1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1.
En la clase de hoy va a aprender cómo usar YouTube para hacer crecer su negocio.
Si yo lo puedo hacer, también ustedes lo pueden hacer.
3.
Puede informar a sus clientes si ha cambiado su horario comercial.